So my name is Corine Pearce. My name in Pomo is Pika Bitamde, which means basket, blossom, bossy sister. And I'm from Redwood Valley. I have ancestry from Lake and Mendocino counties. And I grew up in a very, very traditional home. So I was very lucky for that. I had that opportunity, and a lot of people don't. It was illegal for us to do what I just did. Pray, to introduce ourselves in our language, to sing our songs until 1979. So a lot of people didn't get that opportunity. I'm the first generation in my family since unsettlers have come to California to not be taken away. They took my mom, who's probably younger than some of you in this room now. They took my grandma and my great grandma. So I'm very lucky that my mom chose, when it was legal for us to do what we were supposed to be doing, that she started taking me everywhere and doing it. They were doing it in secret all this time before, and then it was allowed. I've been teaching about traditional ecological knowledge for almost 30 years, and it's a big thing now. Like, it was not a big thing before. It's so in vogue right now. And part of the reason I believe that that's happening is it's been 180 years since unsettlers have come to California and restricted indigenous people from stewarding their own lands. We've been here tens of thousands of years. Tens of thousands. So we evolved with these seeds, with this environment, tending it and responding to it. A lot of people don't know this, and I think it's really, really cool. We used to farm in California. We actually used to irrigate and farm. And then about 7,000 years ago, we figured that that wasn't it. It was better to live in balance with the environment because it was more fruitful. An oak tree can feed hundreds of people. You know, these grasses, and if I had a slideshow to show you, it'd be about pinole seed grasses. These seeds, these plants, who wants to guess? And if you did take my pinole class, you can't answer. How long do you guys think one of these seed grass bunches can live? Somebody guess. 100 years. 100 years. So imagine our shock when ranchers got here and let it was mostly sheep at the time, eat these seed grasses so that they could have meat for one season. Mind blowing, right? Not only are these seeds, they provide food, they actually only grow in their own footprint, so they don't ever get out of hand. They burn at a lower temperature than invasive plants. So that's a big deal. So back to why I think they're letting us do land management. Between about 10 and 20, about 90% of California burnt up. Like, if you look at the map of all the fires through those years, about half of California burnt. So then they finally were like, maybe we should listen to what the indigenous people have to say, because it seems like this wasn't happening before. So this all comes to management and love of the place that you live in. My mom raised me on a lot of indigenous stories, a lot of local stories. But one of the ones that wasn't really a story was just the guideline that humans are loud. We talk a lot. We think a lot, and that causes a lot of sound for us. And God, Creator, is always speaking to us. Like, always. We are always in connection because we are not separate from nature. We are part of it. And she would always say that You know, Earth is speaking to us. It's speaking through the plants. It's speaking through the seeds, and we're not really listening. So we don't listen to the plants very often. So then the animals show us what to do with those plants. And then sometimes we don't even listen to the animals, and it's always apparent, like what you are supposed to be doing in nature. I saw this one thing that was like, would you know what to do if you didn't have religion? I absolutely would know what is right from wrong and what is good and what is in balance and what is harmful without religion. We, it's such a weird thought. A lot of religion is based on capitalism, and that is not okay. It's about, even religion is about extraction. Can they get a tithe from you? Are you willing to give them 10% of your income? You know, how much better would our environment be if we were tithing environmental projects, instead of extractive projects? So I wanted to talk about, I love the word for seed in Pomo. It is sow. It's also the word for east, because that's where everything starts from. The sun comes up in the east, the seeds come out. And I like that because we're sowing the seeds of love. And I was like, oh, so and so, it's so cute. So we eat pinoli, and I'm going to talk about that real quick. So pinoli is seed flour. We call it sobita. And it is a collection of seeds, and you toast them, and then you grind them. And you can just eat them, like stick your finger in and eat it. You can put it on fruit. You can mix it into smoothies. My dude does protein shakes and throws some in there because it's a powerhouse of food. All things that you need to be living, alive, and thriving are in seeds. That's why they're so nutrient dense, and why they just are holding so much life in them. So we harvest those seeds, and this is part of our problem in the forest right now. So those seeds have evolved with us harvesting them. Just like your tomato plants have evolved with you guys, your commercial tomato plants. They're not going to harvest themselves, they're not going to save their own seeds. They have evolved with you. So we go out with our seed beater. It looks like a little plate on a handle, and then our big burden basket that harvests them. And what's super cool about the way that we harvest is it leaves a certain percentage on the ground to resprout. The problem is we haven't been harvesting, so those plants are disappearing because they don't have us. When people ask me to come and look at their property, and they ask me, and it's always the same question. It's so silly. What's missing? What can I add here on my property, to help it? And the real answer is me, or Ashley, or Antoinette, or Monique, who's not here. We are part of the landscape. We are what is missing from the landscape. So I've been teaching about tech for a long time, and I would always talk about fire and how important fire is to the land and to the seeds, especially California native plants. I have a friend, Allie, and we joke about how hard it is to start native seeds because it has, and this is not real, but we joke, like, you have to spin around 3 times, and you have to sprinkle yourself with salt water, and you have to touch it to your lips, and say a secret prayer. Some require scarification. So some require fire, some need to go through your digestive system, some have to go in the freezer, some have to be scraped. You mimic nature, right? To make your seeds start. So you mimic nature. I always would talk about mimicking fire, because I can't go out and harvest, I can't go out and burn the willow and the redbud wherever I want, but I can cut it down, I can coppice it, and I can bring ashes to it. There's this famous white guy now who actually wrote a book based on what I was talking about. He really made me mad because he didn't give me any credit, and he just basically quoted me through the whole first half of the book, which was really annoying. So you guys need to step up and repair the environment. So you need to be fire. You need to be the people that are on this land taking care of the land. That's just the reality of it. I am very limited. Americans really, I will quote Edward Curtis, and he said Americans perfected genocide by the time they got to California. And they really did. They had several ways that they knew would absolutely destroy us. And like I said, I'm the first generation to not be taken away. Imagine that. Imagine your mom being taken away, your grandma. Some of you guys are the same age as me, or younger than me. And it's just crazy. So I was lucky. I learned a lot about seeds. I learned about traditional food. And then when I got older, not that much older, I was 9 when I started weaving baskets. And that changed my whole relationship with being out in nature, because I didn't have a teacher. I didn't have a grandma whose knee I could sit at because of genocide. Very, very thorough and systematic genocide. So I had to learn from books, I had to learn from baskets, but mostly I learned from the plants. And that's the reality, is that I really learned from the plants. I read every single book on basketry, even ones that were in museums that weren't out open to the public, because my mom is pushy and she really had really good connections to get me what I needed when I knew I was a basket weaver. All those books said something different. Like they literally, they all said, so I was like, okay, well, this is absolutely no help. So what I ended up doing, and I did not realize that this was nature journaling until I took a naturalist class last year. So I've been journaling for 30 years about how the plants react to different weather. When I'm dead someday, they're going to use my journals to talk about climate change, because I have seen it in my lifetime already. So I went out all the time. I took extensive notes. I harvested a ton of materials. I spent a lot of time learning from these plants how they need to be taken care of, and who their friends are, who they want to grow with, and who they don't like and want you to take out. So there was a big, steep learning curve for me to incorporate basket knowledge and food knowledge. So those two things together really helped me get involved with seed saving, area restoration. I actually have a basket garden, and it is the oldest basket garden in Mendocino County because it's going on 25 years now. So I have a lot of experience. Like when people come to me, they're like, "We're gonna start a garden." I'm like, "Really? Come check mine out." So it's really good. You can do that. You can start your own little haven. You just have to take care of it. And the best thing is a lot of native plants are perennials, or they seed themselves, which is really, really great. There are places where you can get native seeds and native plants. There's a place in Windsor. There's a place over in Lake County. There's Bay Natives in San Francisco, which I actually think would be more climatized to your climate, because it's so much more moist there than it is in Windsor. So I'm going to talk about the Grace Hudson Garden real quick. So we put in a wild garden. It's native garden in the Grace Hudson Museum. And so many people complained about it because it looked messy. Things weren't in bloom in the summer like they expected them to be. Oh my gosh, so much. So many complaints that they actually had to dedicate the front circle garden to a European garden, which is insane because if you go in the wild garden, it is busy in there with pollinators. And if you go in the European garden, the only guy that's there is the European bee. That's it. But if you go in the wild garden, there are hundreds of native bugs that are relying on these food sources. Hundreds of them. When I was brought up, my mom always really pushed the idea that we were made last, like Creator made everything else first, and then put us in charge of it, not to use up, but to steward, to care for. These are our ancestors, our community, our brothers, our sisters. Most of the stories that I know and can tell talk about how we are related to these animals and to these places and to these everything. So some of you guys have been at some of my talks, but how many of you guys know anything about Pomo mythology? Okay. Yay, there's a couple hands. That's really cool. How many of you guys know about Greek mythology? A little bit. So most people do. Most people know about Zeus and Hercules and all that stuff. I did a storytelling event in Mendocino not very long ago, and somebody came up to me and I laughed and laughed because there was a whole bunch of us telling different stories, different ancestral stories. And the person came up to me and said, "It's so interesting to me how your traditional stories are so much in line with Judeo-Christian stories." And I was like, you do know that Judeo-Christian stories are a collection of old stories, like that got put into a book, just like, the Grimm fairy tales are not the Grimm stories. They all got put. So that was very strange. But this is how it works for us. So there was, of course, the time of nothing, when it was just the earth and the sky. And then there was the time of giants, which is very cool. I love the giant stories because they explain a lot of like I said, I'm from Lake and Mendocino County. Most of my stories get handed down to me through the lake. So it explains why the soil is red. It explains why there are big rock outcroppings. It explains why this tributary is here. It explains why, it has a lot of explanations. So there's the time of the giants, and then there is the anamorphic times when there weren't men and women yet. There were all the animals and all the plants, and they were more human-like. They could do whatever they want. They lived in villages. They had a captain, which is what we call our chief. And our captain was only the captain because he was good at making decisions and good at planning. It wasn't like a European. God, I'm just thinking about the House of Hamburg, like how messed up they are. Like, I can't believe we still have royalty. They're so inbred. It is nuts to me. Like, the Queen and Prince Philip shared a grandparent. And I'm like, ew, gross. I think that's gross because where you guys live is actually the most linguistically diverse area in all of the United States. There are more languages in California than there are anywhere else. Just like we have more plants than everybody else because, in Georgia they have a pine tree. We have 5 pine trees. We got 20 manzanitas. We just have a lot. So we're very, very lucky. But anyway, so anamorphic times. And then there's the trials. And the trials are so cool because that is when animals are hanging out with Creator, who I call Marumda, but there are lots of names. Marumda means the dreamer of the earth or the maker of the earth. And they're deciding, where are our eyes going to be? What are our hands going to look like? Are we going to walk on 2 feet or are we going to run on 4? So there's a lot of cool stuff. And it also, during those trials, it explains why all canines have paws, and why we have hands like a lizard or a water dog. And I'll just tell you one of those real quick because I think it's cute. So they're having competition for whose hands, and it's actually very complicated. There are several layers of what you're going to do. So one of the very first trials is basket weaving, of course, because Pomo people are the best basket weavers in the world. And so everybody gets ready. Coyote is a judge. There's a couple other judges, but Coyote is there. And Fox is Coyote's cousin. Fox is in the competition. He's a good weaver. And so we say water dog. Some people say lizard, but salamander is also in there. And we have hands like salamander, so you can probably guess who's going to win this story. So they're weaving. And Salamander's basket is clearly the better of the two baskets. But Coyote is cheating and says, okay, Fox is the winner. And Creator was hip to what they were doing. And so as punishment, he changed all canines' feet to paws. And unlike cats who can retract their claws, part of the dog's punishment is that they can't retract their claws. They're stuck out forever, which I think is really cool. And so then Salamander passes that test. And Salamander, the final test that Salamander does to see if we're going to get his hands is actually he has to climb across a rope, across a fire. And he's the only animal that can do it. So that's why we have his hands, which I think is really, really cool. And there's a couple other stories I want to tell. I would just like to tell stories. That's my favorite thing right now. Because I think it's really important for you guys to know where you're at and know that we're still here and we are still speaking this language. I have a radio show. And the only reason I agreed to do the radio show was because I believe that the ancestors are listening. And it's really just my excuse to speak Pomo every first Monday of the month and invite my guests to speak their native language, because the more that it gets heard, the more the spirits wake up. And I really believe that, because if they didn't, you guys wouldn't be here. Like the things that I have seen change in the last 30 years blow my mind. Elsie Allen used to tell the story about when she went over to Lake County to harvest said bulrush root, actually, which is the black root. And she went to a traditional harvest site, and the owner of the property came out and poured kerosene in the pond and lit it on fire while she was in it. So that was the attitude of most unsettlers that were living here. We were not considered human. We were subhuman, and it was the law to get rid of us. It was state sanctioned. You could scalp us and take our scalps to the post office and get paid. So that actually wasn't that long ago. And I also like to bring this up because I think it's nuts. So the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln signed only freed slaves of African descent. So it was still legal to have Mexican, Indian, and Chinese slaves in California all the way up until the 1920s. The 20s! That was 100 years ago. That was nothing. Nothing. So I think that that's crazy. But I want to tell you a story, guys, about this. So this is elder. This is an elder clapper. And we use it for musical instruments. And it actually grows all over, basically grows all over the planet, except for the Arctic, the Antarctic, and Siberia. So it grows, there's European elder. It's pretty cool. So it's an important member of our family, and I want to talk about that. So back in anamorphic times, before there were people, Coyote was sitting on the shore of Clear Lake. And this is always a cool story for me because that's where my people are from. Like, my great grandma was from Big Valley, which is on the shore of Clear Lake. So it's like especially wonderful to me when I'm sitting there and telling kids this story because I can say, Coyote was sitting right here, and this is what happened. So, first of all, you should know that for a lot of California Native people, Coyote is creator. But for Pomo people, he's not. He is creator's brother. So, like I said, there are lots of ways to say creator, just like there's lots of ways to say God, Jesus, Father, whatever. So, the way that I say it is Marumda, which has lots of meanings. Marumda, it can mean the dreamer of the earth or the path to the earth. It can mean a lot of stuff, which is really, really cool. Or it can also mean like, I desire land. I desire to be a part of the earth, which is really cool. I love that. So, Coyote, and we always say Marumda lives up north. So, as far as I can surmise, that just means like heaven. Or he doesn't really pay attention to us a lot. You know, he's doing his own thing, kind of like God does now. And so Coyote is sitting on the shore of the lake, and he's really cool. He's crazy sometimes, he's wise sometimes, he's very human to me. Like, because I know people that are like that are absolutely nuts, and then the next minute they're laying down advice, and I'm like, where'd that come from? So this is Coyote, and he's sitting there, and he catches his tail on fire. And so, you know, if he had sense, he would have run into the water, but he didn't. He ran away from the lake, and he caught everything on fire. And the fire burned out of control, and it was so hot that the only thing left was ashes and soot. All the trees are gone, all the animals are gone, all the water has boiled up, and the fish are gone. There's nothing. So it's just blackness. And it always freaks me out when I used to tell this story right after the fires happened. I would usually be bawling at this point because I have those memories of the ashes and how the sky turned black in the middle of the day, and I can imagine that. So Marumda is up north and sees the smoke and is like, oh my gosh, I guess I should go down there and see what's happening. So Marumda comes down, and it is funny to me how Coyote always sounds like a valley girl because I'm telling this story. So Creator comes down, and Coyote's like, my bad. You know, so Creator's like, okay, I'm gonna take care of this. And the story that I'm telling you is actually called The Dawn of Song, or the very first song on earth. How many of you guys like music? Yeah, me too. So Coyote pulls this flute out of his magic bag that's made out of a mountain lion head, and he plays a song on the very, very first song that's ever on earth. And it's so magical that it calls everything back into being. So if any of you guys have ever seen Fantasia 2000, there's where they explode, and then at the end, like, spring comes back and everything turns green and the trees shoot up and the water. That is what is happening in my head when I'm imagining this. And so he's playing the song, and everything is coming back into creation, and everything is beautiful. And what that means, it gives Elder a very special place in our culture. Okay. So, what it means is that Elder is actually co creator of all things on the planet. That's a huge deal. That's like a direct phone line to creator, to the plant world. And oftentimes in the plant world, when plants are hollow, they are considered a direct line of communication to another realm, which means animals, ancestors, higher self, creator. All of those things are in here. This grows everywhere. I study white people a lot because you are a mystery to me. Like, I did this whole series, great lecture series about hierarchy in Europe and medieval times. And I'm like, I got to know everything about white people because they are really a mystery to me. And what surprised me, what I learned in this hierarchy thing, is that everything was given a hierarchy. So that's why the king was infallible, and then the court, and then the church also. And then it also applied to people. Like whatever you did as a job, you had a hierarchy. Like sailors are better than farmers, farmers are better than ranchers. And I was like, what? And then it applied to the plant world, and it applied to the animal world. Where do you guys think we got the term king of beasts? So lion was at the top, and then everything. And this was a shock to me. This was so foreign to my way of thinking. I literally had to call some friends and be like, is this how you guys think? Is this real? Like, is this separation of everything your ancestry? Because I often struggle why people, like Uwe was saying this morning, that a lot of times people have a trouble being in flow because we're brought up in a very rigid society. Like teachers are in charge, principals are in charge of that, assistants, and then upper grade men are, and it's like, what? This is crazy, because we are in a circle. So I'm not any better than anything. Like the lowest worm on the planet is my brother. The slime mold that's taken over my firewood is like my BFF. So back to the story real quick though. So when I was praying this morning, I was doing this with my clapper. So what's super cool about this clapper is that it can speak every language on the planet, because it helped create everything on the planet. So when I'm singing a bear song or a hummingbird song or a deer song, those songs are traditionally considered to be in that animal or in that spirit's language. And our people have lost the ability to speak that language at this point. Fingers crossed. So this is like your universal translator, right? Way before Star Trek came out. So when we sing, this also projects your intention. So when I'm praying, I'm saying words, but the clapper is translating what I really mean. So I'm not a great prayer. Like my mom can whip out some prayers when we're on Alcatraz. And I'm like, oh my God, we need to write a book about that. But I'm never scared because the clapper always talks for me. And what's super cool, so like I said, I studied Europeans and my dad was German. But he was very supportive of our culture, and he was very German. His dad had a German accent. And so, he was just like, and there's one thing I know about Germans for sure. They love Red Indians, and that's what they call us, Red Indians. So what's super cool about this is that it connects all of us. It grows everywhere where we're from. And one of the myths, and I don't actually think it's a myth because it seems pretty fancy to me. In Europe, when the witch trials were happening, and if you're European, you lived through them. And if you are European, and all of us that are alive that have European ancestry lived through that, and I want you guys to know this. So they have proven that trauma gets passed down in your DNA. They studied it on Jews that were in the Holocaust, but it's been getting passed down longer than that. Slavery, genocide, colonization, famine, all of these things are imprinted in us. One thing that I thought was gross is that when the Inquisition was torturing the women to see if they were witches, they actually made their children watch. And that's gross. And so that is imprinted in us as children, of fear. That's why a lot of people have fear of things on their neck. Like I've done neurolinguistic programming and hypnotherapy. Like I was trained to do that. So there's a lot of crazy stuff going on about that. But what they say in Europe is that the souls of those people that were innocent, and they were all innocent, went into the elder tree. Okay? This is hollow, and she took care of them, and she helped them transition from one place to the next. And what's crazy is they always say, like, I'd always read European herbal books that said, don't cut the elder in the spring or summertime because it will bleed. And I'm like, what? So we harvest our elder, and the sap is slightly pink, like barely noticeable at all. But I went to Germany, and I always do when I'm not supposed to do, and I took a tiny cutting in a park, and the sap was red like blood. So it was the same kind. It was black elder, but it was European, and so that I believe. So I always tell people, if you have European ancestry and you have unresolved trauma, you should make friends with elder, because she can really help you heal, not only on a esoteric spiritual level, but on a physical level. Elder is called medicine chest of the people. Every single part of it is medicinal, from the root, which makes you puke, which used to be very important medicine before we had doctors, to the leaves, to the berries, to the flowers. Every single part of it can help to heal you. So that was one story that I wanted to share about elder, because I really feel like it connects all of us. And I think I talked for an hour now. Does anybody have any questions before I go? I never ask questions. It's on KZYX. You can go to their jukebox, and it has all of them. So you can, and it's podcast too. I don't know how any technology works.